The wedding announcement arrived not by gold-embossed card, but through the cruel whispers of the village marketplace, stinging like a dry harmattan wind against Amara Nwankwo's weathered skin. She stood at the center of the dusty square, balancing a heavy bundle of laundry on her head, a physical manifestation of the family burdens she had carried since poverty took hold. Around her, the village of her birth felt suddenly like a cage of prying eyes. Chukwudi Okafor, the man who had promised to be her shield, had traded her for the silk-wrapped promises of Fumi Adeyemi. The betrayal was a public shaming that left her family vulnerable to ruin and eviction. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. The midday sun beat down on the village square, turning the red dust into a shimmering haze that seemed to mock the coldness in Amara's chest. She stood motionless, the heavy bundle of laundry still balanced upon her head, feeling the weight of every prying eye in the marketplace. The whispers of Chukwudi's betrayal had traveled faster than the harmattan wind, stripping her of her dignity before she could even process the loss of her future. Her family's small hut, filled with the scent of her river clay paintings and her father's labored breathing, was on the brink of being reclaimed by debt. She was a girl with nothing but her talent and her shame, staring into an abyss of ruin until the roar of an engine silenced the crowd. A dark, sleek car pulled to a halt, looking like a polished obsidian stone dropped into the dirt. From it stepped a man who seemed to command the very air he breathed, Kofi Orion Mensah. He was dressed in a suit of deep navy, its sharp lines a stark contrast to the faded, patterned wrappers of the villagers. He moved with the quiet authority of one who had never known want, his gaze scanning the square until it locked onto Amara. He didn't see the rags she wore or the dust on her feet. He saw the fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished by her circumstances. As he approached, the marketplace fell into a suffocating silence. He stopped mere inches from her, his presence enveloping her in a scent of expensive sandalwood and power. "I have come seeking a wife to satisfy the terms of my father's legacy," he said, his baritone voice steady and resonant. "And I have been told that the most resilient spirit in this land resides here." Amara looked at the stranger, a man she knew nothing about, and then thought of her father's empty medicine bottles and the mocking laughter of Funmi Adeyemi. With a trembling hand, she reached out, her fingers disappearing into his large, warm palm. It was a desperate agreement, a marriage of convenience born from the ashes of her old life to save the remnants of her family's survival. "I will go with you," she whispered, the bundle on her head finally feeling lighter as she chose a new, unknown path. She believed she was marrying a humble traveler to escape a nightmare, unaware that this single touch was the beginning of her ascent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The dusty horizon of the village faded into a blur of gray asphalt as the midnight blue sedan surged toward the heart of Lagos, carrying Amara away from the only world she had ever known. She sat stiffly against the leather upholstery, her fingers nervously pleating the hem of her faded patterned wrapper while she stole glances at the man beside her. Kofi remained silent, his profile sharp and unreadable, yet he held her hand with a grounded strength that kept her from shattering. When the car finally slowed, it wasn't at a humble traveler's inn, but before a soaring monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the very clouds of Victoria Island. "We are home, Amara," Kofi murmured, his voice echoing with a hidden authority that made the uniformed doormen spring into action. As they stepped into the private elevator, gold-plated and whispering with mechanical precision, Amara felt the physical weight of her village life, the memory of the bundle she had balanced on her head only hours before, clashing with the opulence surrounding her. The doors slid open directly into a penthouse that defied every dream she had ever dared to conjure. It was a palace in the sky, where the floors were polished marble and the walls were adorned with original El Anasui tapestries that she had only ever seen in discarded art journals. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering Lagos coastline, a world of power and light that felt light years away from the mud-baked walls of her studio. Amara stood frozen at the threshold, her breath hitching as she realized the humble traveler she had married was no ordinary man. Kofi shed his jacket, revealing the casual confidence of a man who owned the horizon. He turned to her, the light of the city reflecting in his dark eyes. "Welcome to Orion House," he said, the name finally registering as the pinnacle of Orion Pan-African Holdings. Amara realized then that she hadn't just escaped ruin. She had been whisked into the center of an empire. The stranger she had married to save her family was a titan of industry, and the village girl who had once painted with river clay was now the mistress of a kingdom she was yet to understand. The transition from the dusty paths of the village to the cold, echoing marble of the Orion ancestral estate in Lagos felt like stepping into a different dimension. Amara stood in the center of the grand salon, her hands clasped tightly over her faded patterned wrapper, still feeling the phantom weight of the bundle she had carried on her head only days before. The air here didn't smell of wood smoke and earth. It smelled of expensive lilies and the sharp, intimidating scent of old money. Across the room, seated on a high-backed velvet chair that looked more like a throne than furniture, was Madame Abina Orion. The queen mother of the Orion Empire did not move. She simply watched, her piercing gaze traveling from Amara's worn sandals to the defiant set of her shoulders. Kofi stood slightly to the side, his silent support a shield, but he knew this was a trial Amara had to face alone. Abina rose with a grace that made the silk of her buba hiss against the floor, approaching the village girl her son had brought home to satisfy a legacy clause. To the world, Amara was merely a strategic necessity in village rags, an uncultured intruder in their elite circle. But as Abina drew closer, she didn't look at the frayed edges of Amara's clothing. She looked at the calloused, stained fingertips that spoke of a life spent coaxing beauty from the soil. "They told me my son married a beggar to spite his enemies," Abina said, her voice a low, melodic chime that carried the weight of decades of authority. She reached out, tilting Amara's chin upward. "But I do not see a beggar. I see the prodigy of the soil. I see eyes that have learned to find color in the dark." The test was not about which fork to use or how to dress in designer labels. It was a search for the resilient spirit required to survive the treacherous waters of West African high society. Beneath the humility and the exhaustion of poverty, Abina saw a masterpiece of potential waiting to be unveiled. She turned to Kofi, a small knowing smile touching her lips. "She will need armor, my son. But the heart beneath it is already gold." The transition from the dusty paths of her village to the gleaming marble of the Orion estate had been a whirlwind of silent observation, but it was in the quiet, strategic moves of the weeks that followed that Amara truly began to understand the power she now wielded. Kofi did not merely offer her comfort. He moved with the precision of a master strategist to reclaim her dignity from those who had trampled it. Without a word to her, the legal team of Orion Pan-African Holdings had descended upon her village, quietly purchasing the land where her family had faced eviction and placing the deeds firmly in her father's name. He didn't stop there. The building housing Chukwudi Okafor's investment firm was acquired through a swift, cold corporate maneuver, leaving her former fiancé to realize that the ground he stood on was now owned by the woman he had discarded. While Kofi dismantled her enemy's foundations with his wealth, Amara found her own strength returning through the familiar weight of a brush. She transformed a sun-drenched wing of the penthouse into a sanctuary, though she found she could no longer return to the simple charcoal sketches of her past. She began her Village to Vine series, a collection of massive canvases that used the sophisticated oils of the city to tell the raw, honest stories of the soil. Every stroke was a reclamation of her identity, bridging the gap between the girl who carried laundry on her head and the woman who now dined with presidents. Kofi would often stand in the doorway of her studio, his sharp business suit a contrast to the splattered patterned wrapper she still wore when she worked, his eyes filled with a reverence that had nothing to do with corporate mergers. He saw the prodigy of the soil that the world had missed, and in his silent support, Amara felt her deep-seated fear of being not enough beginning to wither. She was no longer just a village girl caught in a billionaire's world. She was the architect of a new legacy, using her art to turn her past humiliation into a towering monument of grace. The clinical scent of the Orion family's private medical wing was a world away from the earthy aroma of rain on village dust. Yet Amara sat on the edge of the examination table with the same guarded stillness she had possessed in the marketplace. Beside her, Kofi held her hand with a grip that had grown more possessive and protective since their return to Lagos, his usual corporate stoicism replaced by a flicker of raw anticipation. As Dr. Olumide Kinwale moved the ultrasound wand across her stomach, The quiet hum of the high-tech equipment felt like a bridge between the humble life she had fled and the monumental legacy she was now expected to carry. Amara looked at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs, still feeling like the village girl playing a part in a billionaire's dream, until the doctor's eyes widened behind his glasses. "It seems the Orion dynasty is more than secured," Dr. A. Kinwale announced, his voice hushed with a mixture of awe and professional gravity. He pointed to the rhythmic, pulsing lights on the monitor, not one, but 3 distinct heartbeats flickering in the black and white void. "Mr. Orion, you aren't just having an heir, you are having triplets." The revelation hung in the air like a prophecy. Amara felt the breath leave her lungs as the weight of the moment settled over her. These were the future rulers of Orion Pan-African Holdings, and they were thriving within her. Kofi's grip tightened, his eyes shimmering with a rare, unconcealed joy as he looked from the screen to his wife. "3," he whispered, a smile breaking through his fierce exterior as he realized that their impulsive leap of faith in the village had blossomed into a miracle that would silence every critic in Lagos. This news was the ultimate shield against the shadows of the past. No betrayal by Chukwudi and no amount of high society sabotage from Zainab El Mansour could touch the mother of 3 Orion heirs. As the doctor began discussing the specialized care required for Zuberi, Tay, and Amani, Amara realized her place in the dynasty was no longer a question of convenience or contracts. She was the vessel for the next generation, a village prodigy who had successfully transitioned from carrying bundles of laundry to carrying the entire future of a billionaire empire. The dust of the village road, once a suffocating shroud of poverty, now parted like a velvet curtain as a fleet of black-armored SUVs rolled toward the central square. Amara Orion sat in the plush leather interior of the lead vehicle, her hand resting over the slight swell of her stomach where 3 tiny heartbeats, Zuberi, Tay, and Amani, pulsed with the promise of the next generation. Beside her, Kofi held her hand with a quiet, ironclad devotion that had become her fortress since that desperate day she agreed to marry a stranger to save her family from ruin. She was no longer the girl with the heavy laundry bundle on her head or the faded wrapper. She was the matriarch of Orion Pan-African Holdings, draped in silk that matched the colors of the dawn. As the car door opened, a hush fell over the marketplace, the same prying eyes that had witnessed her public shaming now wide with disbelief. Standing by the village well were Chukwudi Okafor and Funmi Adeyemi, their faces pale as they looked upon the woman they had once discarded like refuse. Chukwudi, whose betrayal had been a death sentence for Amara's family, looked small and diminished, his designer labels appearing cheap and hollow in the presence of true old money power. Funmi clutched his arm, her eyes darting between Amara's radiant glow and the formidable security detail that stood at attention behind her. Amara stepped forward, her chin lifted with the grace of a woman who had found her true worth far from the cruelty of village whispers. She did not come with anger, but with the cold, crystalline clarity of a queen. "I heard the marketplace was full of news today," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that silenced the dry harmattan wind. "But I didn't come for gossip. I came to reclaim the dignity you tried to steal." She watched as Chukwudi flinched, the realization sinking in that the girl he had abandoned was now the woman who held the keys to his world's prosperity. With Kofi at her side, Amara realized that the best revenge wasn't a loud confrontation, but the quiet, undeniable proof that she was more than just a village girl. She had returned not as a victim, but as a masterpiece of redemption. The polished marble floors of the Orion corporate headquarters felt cold beneath Amara's feet, a stark contrast to the sun-baked earth of her memories. While she had spent months refining her presence as the new matriarch of Orion Pan-African Holdings, a hidden storm was brewing in the digital shadows. Zainab El Mansour, fueled by the bitterness of a derailed future, decided to strike at what she believed was Amara's greatest weakness, her humble village origins. With a calculated click, Zainab leaked a series of high-resolution village photos to every major tabloid in Lagos and Cape Town. The images captured Amara in her rawest form, balancing a heavy bundle of laundry on her head with the dust of the Nigerian outskirts clinging to her faded patterned wrapper. Zainab's intent was to humiliate, to expose the prodigy of the soil as an uncultured intruder in a world of silk and private jets. As the notifications chimed across the city, Kofi stood by Amara in their penthouse, his expression hardening into a predatory edge as he prepared to activate the Orion security and PR teams. However, as the scandal trended, the narrative shifted in a way Zainab had never anticipated. Instead of mockery, a wave of profound admiration swept through the public. The people of Lagos didn't see a girl to be shamed. They saw a woman of incredible strength and resilience who had carried the weight of her world without breaking. Young girls across the continent began sharing the photos, celebrating the authenticity of a queen who hadn't forgotten the dust she came from. By evening, the planned sabotage had transformed into a global celebration of Amara's character. The village girl aesthetic that Zainab tried to use as a weapon became the ultimate symbol of the Orion brand's new, grounded identity. When Amara finally walked into the gallery that night, she did so with her chin held high, knowing that her past wasn't a shadow to hide, but the very foundation of her power. Zainab's attempt to break her had only succeeded in making the public fall deeper in love with the woman who proved that true royalty is born from the heart, not just the bank account. The sky over the Orion estate in Lagos turned a bruised electric violet as a legendary harmattan storm descended, tearing through the city with a fury that mirrored the drama unfolding within the private medical wing of the mansion. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the sterile scent of antiseptic as Dr. Olumide Kinwale monitored the frantic rhythms of 3 tiny heartbeats. Amara lay amidst the high-tech equipment, her breath coming in ragged gasps, a far cry from the silent village girl who once carried bundles through the dust. Kofi never left her side, his expensive suit jacket discarded and his eyes fixed on her with a raw, desperate devotion that ignored the billions at stake outside those doors. He held her hand with the same ironclad grip he had used in the village square, anchoring her as the first crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the house. As the wind howled like a wounded beast against the glass, the first of the stars arrived. At 11:14 p.m., Zuberi Mensa Orion announced his presence with a cry so piercing it seemed to challenge the storm itself. Kofi's eyes shimmered with tears as the firstborn son was placed momentarily in his arms, a future king born in the eye of a hurricane. But there was no time for celebration. The storm intensified as Tay, the second son, followed minutes later, his arrival marked by a flash of lightning that illuminated the room in a blinding white glare. Amara's strength was waning, her spirit flickering like a candle in the draft, but the thought of the family she was building with the man who had rescued her from the dust kept her tethered to the world. Finally, as the rain began to fall in heavy, cleansing sheets, Amani Mensa Orion made her entrance. The only daughter arrived with a soft melodic wail that seemed to soothe the raging elements outside. Surrounded by her 3 miracles, Amara felt a profound sense of completion that no amount of gold could ever buy. These were the new stars of the Orion dynasty, Zuberi, Tay, and Amani, born not in the quiet of a village hut, but in the heart of a tempest that signaled the birth of a new era. As the storm began to subside, leaving the air fresh and the world transformed, Amara looked at Kofi and knew that their reckless agreement had created a masterpiece of life that would outshine any betrayal of the past. The golden light of the Lagos sunset spilled across the pristine white walls of the Nike Art Gallery, illuminating the culmination of a journey that had begun in the dust of a forgotten village. Amara Orion stood at the center of the grand hall, no longer the girl who carried the weight of her family's poverty on her head, but a woman whose presence commanded the room with a quiet, regal strength. Beside her, Kofi held her hand with the same steadying grip he had offered in the village square, his pride mirroring the vibrant colors of the massive triptych that served as the evening's centerpiece. The Redemption series was more than just paint on canvas. It was a bridge built from river clay and Billionaire's silk, spanning the impossible distance between Amara's humble beginnings and her extraordinary present. The room was a sea of Africa's most powerful figures, yet a hush fell as they studied the central panel, which depicted a village well flowing with liquid gold that transformed into the glass towers of the Orion Empire. Among the crowd, Amara spotted Chikwudi and Funmi, looking small and faded in the presence of such genuine success. They were no longer the architects of her pain, but merely background characters in a story that had outgrown them long ago. Nearby, Zainab El Mansour watched in stunned silence, her previous attempts at sabotage withered by the raw authenticity of Amara's work. "You didn't just paint a story, Amara," Madame Abina whispered, joining them with the triplets, Zuberi, Tay, and Amani, who watched the swirling colors with wide, curious eyes. You painted a legacy. The children, the true living masterpieces of the evening, were being doted on by a doting grandmother who had seen the prodigy of the soil beneath the village rags. As the gallery director announced that the series would be permanently housed in the collection, the applause was a thunderous roar that finally drowned out the last echoes of the cruel village whispers. Amara looked at her husband and realized that her forced marriage had been her ultimate liberation. She had started as a poor girl at the mercy of others' choices, but she stood now as the author of her own destiny, proving that the best revenge is living extraordinarily well.